So this week's Sedra is Parshat MISHPATIM. MISHPATIM means laws, and it's the first Parsha, the first Sedra after the 10 Commandments. So there's no coincidence in the fact that immediately upon being having a godly experience, Yisrael is expected to start learning halachas, start learning law. I'm not sure how people are certain of this, but in Chabad, everybody seems to be agreed that Motzei Yom Kippur, after Yom Kippur, after the davening, after Ne'ilah, after everybody else rushes to eat and drink and so on, the Rebbe used to go into his study and learn Gemara. After the whole Yom Kippur.
For how long?
Hours. So we, after this godly experience, down to business, we have to learn how to live like Jews. So before we go any further, one of the issues that you and I are going to have at one level or another, and at one level of admission or another, is that when you read some of these laws, you think, well, what's that to do with me? I'll give you an example. We're going to spend some time on one of the halachas of a goring ox. It's called a mued and maybe you'll find it interesting, maybe you won't, but whether it's interesting or it isn't interesting, you have to ask the question that the average guy in the eastern suburbs doesn't have many bulls. And if we don't have many oxen, don't have many bulls, is it really very important for us to understand all the halachas relating to oxen? And that you have to contrast that with the Torah that we learn, which says that the Torah is the wisdom of Hashem, and it's nitzchis, it's eternal. It applies to every Jew in every generation. Not only that, but there's plenty of Kabbalistic learning which shows that it not only applies to every Jew in every generation, it applies to every Jew every day. And that there are fascinating studies on how your and my day is actually a reflection of the whole layout of the Torah, that we go into Mitzrayim and we have our difficulties and our parts of the day which are bondage and parts of the day which are escape from bondage, and that's why we recite the Yetzias Mitzrayim every day in the davening. So we live with the fact, and the Alter Rebbe said that we have to live with the times when people didn't understand what that meant. His brother explained that we have to live with the Sedra every week. Every week that the Sedra, if it's Parshas MISHPATIM this week, it's not an accident, it's part of Hashgacha Pratis, and Hashem's Torah with his infinite wisdom is going to be applying to us specially in the MISHPATIM manner this week. So you have all of that on the one side, and then on the side so you're fired up to learn the halachas, and you understand that it's Parshas MISHPATIM, and then you start learning these halachas about oxen, and what happens with the ox, and what your duties are with an ox, and what your duties are with any animal for that matter. So, and the fundamental issue is one of relevance. And this is, I don't suppose anybody really knows why the Rebbe did anything, but certain things that the Rebbe did became evident from the things that he said in Fabrengens. And one of the issues that pained the Rebbe so badly was that the average Jew simply doesn't have enough connection with their learning for reasons of education, so that Torah and observance isn't relevant to him. It's not relevant. I mean, we're going. I'll give you an example. If I get time, we'll do some stuff with indentured employees. It's translated in English as slave. It's a bad example, but I'll give you an example in relation to that, which we might get to do some of that and might not. There's one thing that, let me tell you, and I ask you, how is it relevant, right? A Jew, if a person works as an indentured servant for a period of time, he's let free after 6 years. If we get time, we'll go into why he's in that condition, etc. But the Torah says 6 years maximum. Now he goes free, and then the question is whether he goes free with the wife or children, whether he had the wife before or after he got into. But so the Torah asks the question: what if he doesn't want to go?
Yeah.
Right? He likes the boss. He lives very happily there. So it says that he gets his ear pierced next to the mezuzah on the door, and he becomes a pierced-eared slave, right? And you read this for the first time or the first few times,
Makes no sense.
and if somebody's not explaining it to you, but a pierced-eared slave, you have to understand, is the Torah's way of explaining to modern dummies that there is such a thing as an abused wife syndrome, that there are people who suffer abuse and trade that abuse off for some other corresponding levels of comfort. They live in a nice house, he provides this, he provides that, but that he beats her up once or twice a year, so she puts up with it. That is a pierced slave. That's exactly what is forbidden to a Jew. A Jew's got to be free. Got to be free. Why? To serve Hashem. So you can't voluntarily subscribe to be persecuted and tolerate it. It's forbidden for us. So all of these laws have a few levels. There's the practical level, which you've got it, for example, the laws of marriage, laws of divorce. You have to have a get. The get has to be in a certain form. It has to be delivered in a certain manner. So all of these halachas are important because without them, you don't have the reality. But on the other hand, there is a separate level altogether to every halakha, which is the underpinning, like everything else in creation, there's a guf and a neshama, there's a body and a soul. There's a body of Torah, that's the halakha, and there's the soul of Torah, which is the Chassidus that we learn. Excuse this cough, I don't know where it came from, it came in the last day or two. So, and nowhere is it more obvious that there's a body and a soul than when we learn the halakhas, because some of the halakhas apply. I mean, mikveh applies, kashrus applies, shatnez applies. There are many halakhas which apply whatever country you live in and whatever time it is. But then there are many halakhas that simply don't apply because the circumstances aren't there. If the circumstances aren't there, you could be forgiven for thinking that those laws are irrelevant. But that is a very serious mistake. That's a very serious mistake that people who haven't learned how to learn Torah make in good faith. I'm not being critical, I'm not blaming anybody. How do they know? So I thought we'd take a couple of examples and go through them and show you. Well, when I say a couple of examples, going through a couple of Farbrengens from the Rebbe. So the time behind. So let's start off with this ox, even though you and I don't have many oxen. So it says like this. It says, so let me first of all go through the halachas with you. If an ox gores another ox, or indeed another animal, or somebody's property, then he has to pay initially 1/2. Why 1/2? So it's explained that he didn't know his ox was going to gore, so he shouldn't have to pay all of it, all the damage. How would he know that the ox was going to gore? On the other hand, he can't say, well, I didn't know the ox was going to gore because something has happened. His neighbors suffered a damage, so that the Torah in its wisdom says that under those circumstances, 50/50. He has to pay half the damage. So, hi, my uncle lives next door. Hi, my uncle's got an ox. You've got an ox. Your ox goes across and kills his ox, gores his ox to death. His ox cost $1,000. You got to pay $500 to him. So you're both out of pocket $500. Right? So what happens if it happens again? And what happens if it happens a third time? So the halakha is that if it happens a third time, you have to pay the whole lot. Why? Because you are presumed to have simple intelligence to understand that you've got a problem with this ox. This ox is a goring ox. A goring ox is called a muad. So it can be an ordinary ox or it can be a muad. If it's a muad, then you have to understand that you know that the likelihood is he's going to kill your neighbor's ox, and therefore you have to compensate him the full amount.
But in a case like that, doesn't your ox have to be killed?
Yeah, that's all. I'm leaving that. You're quite right. I should have done this properly and said that your ox has to be killed, it has to be stoned, but I'm really talking about damages.
Right.
Okay. So, what are you looking for?
Oh, that's okay. Thank you.
You beat Nick.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you now, but there's a catch to this. It's not just the 3 times that you then have to pay all of it. By the way, you should understand that this is in many ways contrary to modern logic, because you should. I mean, the law in this country, for example, is that you have entire responsibility for your animal, whatever, whether he's got a history of biting people or not. You know, he bites the postman, you've got to pay. There's strict liability for your animals. Not so in Torah. So in Torah, it's understood that liability only becomes strict liability after a pattern of behavior is established where you are now expected to bear responsibility for it. So, and then there's a further injunction that not only does your bull or your ox have to gore 3 times for you to have to pay the whole amount, but you have to be warned by 2 kosher edim, 2 kosher witnesses, that your ox has done what he's done, and you have to be careful, because if he does it a 3rd time, you have got to pay the whole of the amount of money. So you need 2 things to happen. You need, first of all, the ox to repeat the behavior 3 times, and secondly, you have to be aware of it and warned of the consequences, right? And then you've got to pay for everything. So that's the halacha of the goring ox. Let's take it a step further. How long? Let's say your ox is gored. He's gored the next door neighbour's ox. You've been warned 3 times. You've paid the whole money for the ox. Now you bring your ox home again. What's the story now? If he gores another ox, does you start again, or you don't start again? You don't start again. But is that ox ever retrievable, or is it going to be that for the rest of your and his life, if he gores again, you have to pay 100%? Or is there a time limit? What if he goes 5 years and doesn't it? So the answer is there is a limit, and the limit is served in one of 2 ways. One way is if you retrain the ox. Now, apparently you can retrain animals. I wouldn't have a clue. I can tell you that I just share with you, for not that anyone gives a damn, from the time our first child was born until the last wedding, we had a dog in the house. We had probably, through 4 children and 30 years, we probably had 3 or 4 dogs over the period of time. One of them we had for about 10 years. And I was never able to train the dog that it shouldn't defecate in the house. Never. And everybody I talked to said, you know what the problem is? The problem is the owner, not the dog. If you can't, you have to know how to train. I didn't know how. I couldn't do it, right? But let's pretend that there are people who really can do it. And I can see one of my daughters has a dog that's wonderfully trained. She got it trained. And it never goes to the toilet in the house. So the creature is retrained, let's say. You retrain your ox not to gore. What's the test? The Rambam brings a test. It's very interesting. The Rambam says that if the ox can be left with children, little children, and they're safe, that he's been retrained.
If it's not,
If it's not,
You got a big problem.
you're not going to gamble.
presumably, he's talking about his own children.
Yeah.
So presumably, you have enough sense that if you haven't retrained the
You won't do
ox,
it.
you won't do it, right? Anyway, that's the but that is the test. The test is that if the ox is retrained, and as a result of that retraining, you are satisfied. You can be satisfied that he doesn't gore, and then you don't have to pay. You only have to. If he gores again after that, you only have to pay half. We're back to half again until you're warned, and it happens again, and then you're back to. Now there's another way. There's another way that, and this is also very counterintuitive. If you sell the ox to another owner, I'm using English terms. The words in the Gemara are shinoi rishus. Shinoi rishus means a change in domain, right? But for all practical purposes, we're talking about selling the animal to somebody else. If you sell the animal to somebody else, and that guy starts off at the beginning again. So, why? Because he hasn't been warned. The halachas of alleviating the 100% payment down to 50% have not been satisfied. So therefore he only has to pay 50%. If this animal, which was known to be a muad in the other person, he buys him, but he is not subject to the 100%, only 50%, until he is warned by 2 witnesses that this animal is a goring animal, tra-la-la, right? It doesn't have to gore 3 times, it has to be warned. It has to be warned in front of witnesses. And in his own inimitable way, the Rebbe asks the question, what's this got to do with us?
After all that.
Reb, what's this got to
It's
do?
an oxymoron.
What's it to do with us? So let's get deeper straight away, so that everybody here is familiar with this language, so we can. Every Jew has a nefesh habahamis and a nefesh elokis. Every Jew has an animal soul and a godly soul. So the first thing that you have to understand is that whenever you see the word animal in Torah, immediately that's translatable into, obviously there's a physical animal, but immediately it's transferable into a understanding of the dimensions and the practicalities and the levels of your nefesh habahamis, of your animal soul. So there are people who have tame animal souls, wouldn't think of doing anything wrong. Or if they do think of doing something wrong, they overcome that. They don't do something wrong. They're governed by whatever reasons that they are, whether it's fear of God or wanting to be popular or wanting to, whatever it is, they don't do wrong. And then there are people who are absolutely only interested in doing wrong. There are people like that. They don't give a damn about the laws. They don't give a damn about driving on the right side of the road or the left side of the road, or if they want something, they're narcissistic enough to want it to the exclusion of anybody else's rights or interest, or what's it to do with them? They don't care. They want this, they'll take it. You want it, I'll take it. So those people are described in Hasidus, or come under the umbrella in Hasidus of being a goring ox. Why? Because they allow their animal nature to run wild. Now we've got to take a short detour. I've got to explain something. That there's a difference between sorry, let me go back a step. The nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, spawns a thing called the Yetzer Hara. That means a desire for bad. You should understand that the nefesh habahamis, the animal soul, is not bad. There's nothing bad about it. It's an animal with the limitations of an animal. The nefesh elokis, the godly soul, spawns a yetzer toiv, a good inclination. There is plenty good about the godly soul. There's nothing bad about the animal soul. But when the animal soul functions in an animalistic way and ignores the welfare of other animals, like an animal does, then he spawns at what's called, terminology is the Yetzer Hara, which is an evil inclination. Let me give you an example. You want to eat. You're hungry. You want to eat. So you access food. Right? Nothing wrong with that. That is the nefesh habahamis working normally. It's hungry. What do you do when you're hungry? You eat. What if there's no food? You get the food. If the food's in the other room, you go into the other room. Now, what if the food doesn't belong to you? Then you can try and earn it. You can try and borrow it. Or you can smash the door down and take it. Right? You smash the door down and take it. Now your Yetzer Hara is serving your animal soul. You can still, and the animal soul needs to eat, but it doesn't say that it needs to eat with violence. It could eat in peace and harmony and come to some arrangement for that food, trade something for the food, or whatever it is, work it off, whatever it is. So it can be done peacefully and in a civilized way, That's the animal soul functioning without a Yetzer Hara affecting it. Or it can be lazy and self-centered and yeshistic and just want to smash and attack. So that's when it's Yetzer Hara is functioning. So so there are people who have, and you should understand another big, deeper secret of Torah is that there are people who have nefesh habahamis, a nefesh habahamis, an animal soul, strong like an ox, or you can have one timid like a rabbit, or like a little lamb. And in fact, there's great deep Kabbalah in the statement. There's a very curious statement in Bereshis where Hashem brings all the animals to Adam Rishon, and Adam Rishon names the animals. You remember that? That's in Bereshis. What's that about? He identifies the strength and quality of the nefesh habahamis of each of these creatures, and they are all part of our nefesh habahamis at a deeper level. So an ox is used as an example of the strongest of the examples of a nefesh habahamis. So if you have what is the Torah meaning of a goring ox? That is a person who spends his life, or parts of his life, contrary to a decent human being. Animals don't care about. I'll give you an example. Animals have no level of kindness. Maybe to their young they do instinctively, but if one animal has a big plate of food and one animal doesn't have, the one who has a big plate of food doesn't say, "Excuse me, come share. Let's sit down together. We'll share the meal together." Right? He doesn't see any obligation to do that because the nefesh habahamis isn't wired like that. The nefesh habahamis is an animal soul which is designed to satisfy natural needs. And that's its job, and that's what it does. Now, there's some animal souls that do that in a way which is socially workable, and some who just couldn't care less and just do whatever they want to do to get what they want. So that is, in Torah, that's the concept of an ox that gores. So let's go back to the halakha. If you have an ox that gores, let me give you an example. Let's do this first. If you have an ox that gores, if you have a person who constantly does the wrong thing, and he's hopeless, he just will not change. So that guy is responsible to his last part of his existence. He hasn't got any excuses, he hasn't got any reasons, he hasn't got any leeway. He's got to do total tshuva or nothing. The guy, he is beyond any kind of concession unless he does tshuva. So how can he change this reality? There are two ways. The first way is that he can retrain. What does it mean he can retrain? Let me give you an example. Let me take you through a cycle. This is actually a very realistic cycle. It happens all the time. You get kids that are brought up in a frum home, go to a frum school, never saw anything else, right? Never ate non-kosher, never turned on the television and saw a naked lady, lived a totally frum life, right? And then they go to university or get a job somewhere or wherever it is, and they meet people who don't have these restraints. They can't believe it. They can't believe that people can eat anything they like, or that they don't have to be at home on Shabbos, or they can go to a movie on Shabbos. There really are people who go to the movies on Shabbos. And one day, this kid, he's now 20, and he says, if he's got the guts, he tells his parents. If he doesn't have the guts, he doesn't tell his parents. He decides, you know what? It's time that I tried a cheeseburger. I'm going to try a cheeseburger. And he walks down the cheeseburger shop, wherever that is, and he buys it, and he's trembling. I don't understand, for 20 years, this was so forbidden, and he's trembling with this. And he takes a bite, and he takes another bite, and he loves it. And you know what? Lightning doesn't strike. He doesn't drop dead. He can't believe it. He doesn't drop dead. In fact, he feels exactly the same as he did before, only better. So the next day, he has another cheeseburger. And the next day, another cheeseburger. And and the Gemara explains that you do an Avera once, you tremble. You do an Avera twice, it's not so bad. You do an Avera the third time, that's your minig already. That's already where you are. So this this kid eats non-kosher slowly and starts going to the movies on Shabbos and whatever it is, and he becomes he throws away everything valuable that he was educated with and becomes a goring ox. The reality is that he is satisfying all his needs to the exclusion of anything he believes in, etc. How does he come back? One day he decides he's going to do tshuva. And when he does tshuva, then he has to retrain himself that I'm not having a cheeseburger tonight. I'm not having it, and tomorrow again I'm not having a cheeseburger. And the next day again. You know, you talk to somebody who gives up alcohol. Right? Somebody gives up alcohol. The first day is very hard. Second day is very hard. There comes you get these people, the drunks, who say, I'm 2 years, 5 weeks, and 7 days and 8 minutes clean, you know? Because it's very hard. It's an ongoing thing. But it is possible to retrain yourself to go back to the position where you were before, where you have a nefesh habamis, but you don't give in to the Yetzer Hara that comes with it. So that is this first case of retrain. And how do you know? You can put your nefesh habamis with little children, and you're not going to harm them. You're not going to feed them traits. You're not going to. I remember there was a guy in Sydney. His name is. He was employed by yeshiva. He was a rabbi, and he was actually a very good tennis player. And and one day, and they lived in Woodstock Street in the days when we all went to yeshiva. And one day, his parents, who really disapproved of him being from, came to the house, and he had his eldest son was 7. And the eldest son looked at the grandfather who'd come to the house, and he said, Zadie, why aren't you wearing a yarmulke? And the grandfather said to him, look, the only reason you wear a yarmulke is that your father forces you to. There's no reason to wear a yarmulke. And when you grow up, you're not going to wear a yarmulke either. And that day, they packed up and left for America, the parents. And the kids are now all, he did the right thing. The kids are all now from Yidden, married with children, etc. This is 50 years ago. But the point that I'm trying to make is that there are outside influences, and you can be free from those, or you can give in to those. If you make the mistake of giving in to them, it is possible to retrain yourself so that you go back. So what about the second case? The second case where you have a shinoi rishus, a change in domain. In English, that it's explained that you sell the animal to someone else. So again, this is very deep. Rebbe explains that, and this is quite a long journey, which I'll try and summarize quickly, but we are different people to different circumstances, each one of us. I don't know if I'm identifying an experience you're aware of. I find personally that if I'm with somebody that is excessively tidy, I'm dying to make a mess. It's natural. It's normal.
That's me.
Yes.
Or take it the other way. You're with somebody that is such a slob that you suddenly become tidier than you normally are, because as a reaction to it. We function in terms of the cues that are fed to us. We don't. I'm not suggesting we control those cues. If you do try and control those cues, you can go mad. I mean, that's a failure to understand Ashkoka Pratis. That's a failure to give space to the other person. Those people who are called controlling because they want to structure the environment so that they get the cues that they want so that they can respond in the way that they want to. But we are different people with different cues. So when this animal is sold to somebody else, the animal's soul is, well, let's keep it at the animal level. The animal is now responding to his new owner, and his new owner may be, for example, gentle, whereas the old owner may have been rough and cruel. So if he's rough and cruel, he's a goring ox. If his master is gentle and kind to him and feeds him better, and he relaxes and he doesn't need to gore anymore. So there's a great wisdom in this, that if the rishus is changed, if the domain is changed, then the input is changed, and if the input is changed, the output can be changed. How do you handle that at a personal level? Explains the Rebbe a whole long section, which I'm going to try and paraphrase, of negativity and positivity. Let me explain what he says. Let's say that you have a negative, and you're conscious of it. Right? You have a need to do something unpleasant. It's antisocial. It's selfish. It's narcissistic. It's counterproductive to everybody's happiness, but you want to do it. And you don't like it that you want to do it. You really don't like it. You understand that it's negative. You understand that you're being a swine to do it. But nevertheless, you feel the need to do it. Hello? Someone give him a l'chaim. So
There's one open.
there are two ways you can deal with this. You can spend your days or a period of time investigating that negativity. You can spend time asking yourself, why is it that you do this? You go to see a therapist and you spend 100 hours with the therapist examining what happened to you in the woodshed and how your father beat you around the ears when you were 4, and you plumb the depths of this problem and try and fix it. But at the end of the day, let's say you've been going to the therapist for a year, you spent a year involved in that negativity. The other way of dealing with it is to take your mind off that subject absolutely, so that every time it occurs to you, you change the subject mentally. Now, I need to explain something. We need to go on a bit of a detour for a moment. the soul is hardwired. They're called the koikas hanefesh. They're the powers of your soul. There are three intellectual, 7 emotional. And every soul has those 10 levels, except that every soul has different levels of intellect and Chokhmah, Binah, and Das, as it's called. And every person has different levels of emotion. Some are kinder, some are more selfish, some are less selfish, some are stronger, some are weaker, some are etc. Now, the truth is, and you're born with those koikas hanefesh, and unless you're a tzaddik, you will die with those. That hardwired, the way that is. So let me give you an example I always use, because this is the one that I heard the first time and it meant something to me. There are some people who are spendthrifts. They don't care. They spend money easily. There's some people that are misers, Parshat misers. And those misers, some people, it's so painful for them to part with money. I'm not talking about giving tzedakah. I'm talking about parting with money for anything. They'll walk 4 miles rather than catch a bus which costs this much because they have no bigger nachas than not paying for something. You know, you get people who, I'll give you an example. You go to Central Synagogue, and you go to Central Synagogue and you have a look at the kiddush that they put on. The kiddush they put on is wonderful, right? Now there are people who are genuinely hungry. And they go to shul genuinely to eat the kiddush. And that's why they do it. And it's a wonderful thing that they do. And those people get one decent meal a week for sure, right?
And take some of the food home.
And that's, yeah, good. And they need it. And they need it. And then there are some people that go and they go to the kiddush. And they go to the kiddush because it's free. Do they need it to be free? No, they don't need it to be free. But it kills them to pay. Right? Now those people, you got to. The Rambam explains that those people need to treat that problem by doing the opposite. We haven't got time for this at the moment, but I need to take you to a mimer from the Rebbe on Parshat Shlach, where the Rebbe explains this, that hard wiring of your soul, the koikas hanefesh, is added to by garments. The soul has garments, exactly the same way as the body has garments. The body needs clothes, the soul needs clothes. What the clothes of the soul are machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh, thought, speech, and action. And although you can't change the body, you can't change the hardwired aspects of the soul, you can change the clothing of the body. So everybody has control over those 3 levels of machshava, dibur, and ma'aseh. Everybody. It doesn't matter who they are, they have total control over those 3 things. Now, it's true that those 3 things have a degree of difficulty. Action is the easiest thing to control. Much more easier is action than speech. Speech is very difficult to control. Much more difficult is thought. Paradoxically, you don't have to have action all the time. You don't have to have speech all the time. But we never stop thinking. I don't know if you know this. This is a matter of Torah. I don't know what the medicine of it is. But a human being's brain never stops functioning. Not for a microsecond. You want to tell me when he's asleep? When he's asleep, he's dreaming. You just don't remember all the dreams. But we don't stop thinking. However, since thought is one of the 3 garments, just like you can change a bad action into a good action, you can refrain from negative speech if you want to. It's hard, especially if you've got a juicy bit of gossip. You know, this guy, Mr. Goody Two Shoes all day, and you find out, he's got this in his skeleton in his cupboard. Now you're ready to throw kiddush. But you can control it. You can control it and not speak lashon hara. And I have to tell you with pride, we see that the kids that go to, if you ever spend some time with kids that go to a religious school, they're sitting around the table Friday night or Shabbos day, and somebody slips and starts to say something bad about Lashon Hara, Lashon Hara. The kid is warning you not to say Lashon Hara. It's wonderful. So you have control over the garments of your soul, the thought, speech, and action. When we're talking about a change of reshus for the animal soul, that it's gone to a new owner, that means that the person has changed his garments. And going back to the negativity and the positivity, you can spend your day, as I said, at the therapist, examining this, and you spend a year in negativity. Or you can decide that every time I think, let's take an idiotic example. You have an ongoing lust for ice cream. I'm trying to avoid anything seriously deliberate in case one of us are afflicted by it. So let's just use ice cream, which isn't going to hurt anybody. You've got a lust for ice cream.
I always do.
So if you have a lust for ice cream, every time the lust for ice cream comes upon you, you think, what can I do? You have a project. You decide you're going to have a pet project. You're going to help people with food on Shabbos, or you're going to visit the sick, or you're going to do some good. And every time you make a resolution, every time I think of ice cream, I'm dismissing that thought and replacing that thought with a different thought which I've projected out and I planned out in advance, and I haven't put there. And if you can do that, you become a new person.
I take the ice cream to the hospital and eat it with them.
You become a new person. So if you become a new person, then you're no longer the same goring ox. You're now a quiet ox, an ox that doesn't gore. You know, I'll give you an example of this last category of negativity and positivity. There's a letter in the Igris where a girl, I've quoted this letter before in this year, a girl writes into the Rebbe and asks for a brocha that she should change seminaries again. Why? Because all the girls at the 2 previous seminaries that she went to are really very nasty. And she had the bad luck to be in bad company, nasty company, and she didn't want to be in a non-from school, but she wanted to be in a place with nicer girls. So she wanted a brocha that she should. So the Rebbe wrote back to her this. He said, I'd like you to set out on the following project. That every day you pick one of the, he didn't give her the brocha, by the way. Every day you pick one of the girls in your seminary and do something nice for them. Do something that they think is nice for them. And I want you every year of Shabbos to write to me and tell me what the 7 things were during the week. Right? Do you understand what he's saying? What he's saying to this girl is, you think everybody is nasty. Why? Because you're so self-involved. You're so obsessed with yourself that you decide they're all terrible because they don't care about you. Why should they care about you? Be nice to them, one by one, and they'll begin to like you. And you won't think they're awful people. So that's an example of this change of reshus, that she became, as a result of this, a different person, in the sense that instead of being the most unpopular kid in the class, she became a normal person. Some people liked, some people didn't like, whatever. But why are people popular? Because they don't demonstrate. We all are selfish, everybody. I used the example last week. You go to hi, my uncle has a wedding, and there's some wedding photographs, and they show you that you're in the wedding photograph, and there are 30 people in the wedding photograph. Who do you look for first? You look for yourself, right? That's normal. It's a normal thing. But when people live in a way which demonstrates that all they care about is themselves all the time to the exclusion of you, you're not going to like them. Those people are not popular. Why? Because they don't deserve to be popular. they don't, they're behaving like animals. That's the reality. So the fascinating thing about this scoring ox is that at the end of the day, you can control it. And there are two ways to control it. One way is to make changes yourself, and the other way is to change yourself to the extent that you're a new owner, and a new owner has a different. Now we've got a few minutes left. I really should have spent more time on this, but I'll give you another example, and again, this is as wild as an example as I can think of because it's so far away from us. The Sedra starts out with defining the difference between an Eved Ivri and an Eved Kanani. And now I'll translate. There are two kinds of slaves in inverted commas. There are non-Jewish slaves and Jewish slaves. Let me spend 30 seconds just explaining to you what this slavery business is. It's not slavery in the sense that we regard as evil in 200 years ago. That was we all civilized countries would agree that it's a terrible thing. In Jewish law, we don't have any concept of prison. I don't know if you know that. There is no such thing as prison. A man has to be free to serve God, to do the mitzvahs, and you can't do that if you're in prison. If you're in prison and they don't allow film, what do? So we don't have prison. So what happens when a man harms another man? When a person harms a person, he has to pay damages, like with the bull, like with the mu'in. What's the level of the damages? So the level of that depends what you've done. If you have to pay $5,000 and you don't have $5,000, so in Jewish law you've got to go and work for that person who you owe the $5,000 to until you work it off, and you become an eved. The word eved is translated as a slave, but it doesn't mean a slave. It means someone who has got a debt and has to work that debt off. Now, it says that if you acquire an eved, you've got to be very careful. Why? Because the eved is entitled to everything, at least to your standard of living. You have feather pillows and sponge rubber pillows, and let's pretend the feather are better. Then if you've got to give him a feather pillow if you're using a feather. What if you only got one feather pillow? He gets it. He eats before you eat. You're not allowed to eat one quality level of food and give him a lower quality level of food. You're not allowed to eat more food and give him less food. His bedroom and his ensuite have to be as good as your bedroom and your ensuite. And his aftershave has to be the same qualities as your aftershave or better. Right? So it's not a bad life to be if you go to work for someone who's rich, in many ways it's not so bad, and that's why we have this whole thing about the pierced-eared slave, and because some people, it's not a bad life. You don't have to work. You don't have to worry about who's going to feed you. You don't have to pay a mortgage. You don't have to, etc. You don't have to do the shopping. It's all done for you. There are two kinds of servants. There are, and with a Jewish servant, there are two kinds of servants. There are non-Gentile servants and Jewish servants. The Jewish servants have to go free in the seventh year. So whatever the debt is, it's got to be got rid of within 7 years. Now, there's a question on what's the difference between an Eved Ivri and a Gentile. There's no difference in the way you look after them. That's bad thinking. And that's been the thinking of ignorant Jews throughout the centuries. That when we learn that we are the chosen nation, they think this is a matter of privilege. It's not a matter of privilege, it's a matter of responsibility. It's a matter of we've been given a different job to do than Gentiles have been given to do. Their job is precious, our job is precious. That we are an Am Segula, that means that we are a precious nation, because what Hashem wants is for us to introduce Ruchnis into Gashmis, Gashmis into Ruchnis. We've been through this many times. We haven't got time for it now. So it's a matter of responsibility. It's not a matter of superiority. And so there's no difference in treatment of a Gentile Eved or a Jewish Eved. There's a difference in responsibility. But deeper than that, the Rebbe explains that there's a difference in the manner in which you and I serve internally. The Gentile serves like an employee. In other words, he does what he's told. And if he doesn't, he gets punished. He gets fined, his pay is docked, whatever it is. And he's in fear of his conditions becoming worse, and therefore he behaves and he does the work for you. That's not the way a son functions in terms of his jobs that his father gives him. If a son goes into the father's business, he knows that one day it's going to be his business too, and he has a different level of empathy and a different level of... So it says that the Eved Kanani, the Gentile servant, serves out of fear, out of awe, out of fear of reprisal, whereas the Jewish Eved serves out of love. Why? Because Boni Matem Lashem Melekechem, that you are children to your God, and that we are an Am Segula, and we have a different relationship with Hashem than the animal world does, or the Gentile world does, or the inert world does. And our relationship with Hashem is one of serving out of love. Explains the Rebbe this. We haven't got time for any more than this. The Rebbe explains this, that those two levels exist in every Jew. It's not that there's the Gentile part of humanity and the Jewish part. Those two levels exist in each and every Jewish soul, so that we have an aspect which is where we serve our God out of fear, and out of awe. And that's a very good thing. If you stop and consider, spend 5 minutes when you're walking down at the beach on your own, and you think about the size of the planetary system, and how that's dwarfed by our universe, and how that's dwarfed by 400 billion universes. And all of that's being controlled every moment, because it's being recreated every moment, and Hashem is bringing that into being every moment. And you think along these lines for long enough, all of a sudden you're standing there trembling at what at the relationship you have with your God. On the other hand, for Jews love God. They're in love with every Jew. Well, I'm not talking about from Jews. I'm talking about every Jew. Every Jewish woman who used to hang out the washing before they had dryers would do deals with God. That I don't want it to rain, God, until the clothes are dry, until I brought the clothes in. And every, I can tell you, it's probably better not to tell so many people this, but for example, there is a line of authority that faithfulness in the husband is affected by the machshava, by the mindset of a woman lighting Shabbos candles. If more women knew that, they'd light Shabbos candles with much more devotion. So there are two levels that we serve God. We serve God out of awe, and we serve God out of just Parshat love. And therefore both of those levels are applicable, and that's why we have all these laws in relation to an Eved Kanani and an Eved Ivri. And even though there is no such thing, and we don't even have a civil legal system that reflects any of this, but those laws are just as important as they were then. They apply just as much to you and me, just as much in each generation and in our generation and right now. So l'chaim.
The bottom line is I will go home and sell my ox.
That's it.
No more.
Yeah, that's
I think you
right.
should take a trip to Al Gore.